This is a special report from ABC News Digital.
Hello, everyone. I'm Devin Dwyer in New York. This is an ABC News Digital special report days after protesters toppled the Russian-backed government in Ukraine. The conflict there appears to be worsening rather than ending. The world's attention now shifting to Crimea, an autonomous region formerly part of Ukraine, but with strong connections to Moscow. Will Ukraine remain unified, or do the Russians have their own plan for the Black Sea Peninsula? ABC's Lana Zak is here with all the latest. Lana?
Hi, Devin. Yes, after truces that have been held and months of protests, the situation in the Ukraine is now escalating.
In the Crimean area of the Ukraine, Russian flags now fly. The Crimean parliament has been seized by pro-Russian groups. It is the latest turn as the split loyalties in Ukraine have the nation hovering dangerously close to serious escalation and violence. One group siding with the European Union and the U.S., the other siding with Russia. These are Russian tanks at Ukraine's doorstep. 150,000 Russian troops on high alert for an unplanned military drill. It is an unwelcome surprise for the new Ukrainian prime minister, just sworn in today.
My first message: no boots on the ground.
According to reports in the Russian media, the ousted president, Viktor Yanukovych, has fled to Moscow, insisting that he is still Ukraine's rightful leader. But after his response to protesters left more than 100 dead and 2,000 injured, he faces possible prosecution in the International Criminal Court. The situation in Ukraine is a tinderbox. U.S.-Russian relations have turned sour, as Secretary of State John Kerry said on MSNBC.
We do not believe this should be an East-West, Russia-United States. This is not Rocky IV, believe me.
But the situation is beginning to look a lot like an epic showdown as clashing protesters further divide the country.
And the United States continues to provide economic and political support to the government of the Ukraine. But in its response to Russia, you will notice it's being really cautious there, Devin. The last thing the United States wants to do is plunge itself back into a Cold War, now in a modern era. Live in New York, Lana Zak, ABC News. Back to you, Devin.
Thanks so much, Lana. For more now on all the developments in Ukraine, I want to bring in ABC's Alex Marquardt, who's been reporting from Simferopol in Crimea. Alex, thank you so much for joining us. Reports this morning on some fast-moving developments there. Gunmen apparently have taken the Crimean Parliament building. What do we know about who these people are and what their plans are?
Good afternoon, Devin. Well, we know that there were dozens of them, pro-Russia gunmen who stormed the parliament early this morning. They very quickly hoisted the Russian flag to fly alongside the Crimean flag on the roof. As far as we know, they have no official capacity. We think they're still in the building, but we don't know what their demands are, if there are any, because what it's really doing is driving home the fact that these gunmen, along with very many others here in Crimea, want the government of this autonomous region to remain firmly pro-Russian. To show you that it didn't appear to be all that aggressive, Crimean lawmakers met in the building. They fired the government and called for a referendum on May 25th, the very same day that Ukraine is supposed to be holding presidential elections. The referendum will be on whether Crimea should stay with Ukraine. And in support of the gunmen who are inside the parliament, hundreds of Crimeans rallied outside the parliament chanting pro-Russia chants and playing Soviet songs, kept at a safe distance by Crimean police.
So this region is a Russian stronghold inside Ukraine, Alex, but I think before this week, many Americans may have been unfamiliar with Crimea. Give us a sense of why this region has been so contested and what Russia's stake is there.
Well, Crimea has been governed as an autonomous province of Ukraine. It's really unique in Ukraine. It's the only province, they call them oblasts here, that didn't really get swept up in the revolutionary unrest that we saw elsewhere in the country last week, over the past few weeks, and of course over the past few months. The majority of the people here in Crimea are ethnically and culturally Russian. They feel much closer to Russia than to Ukraine. Some even want to be part of Russia, to have Russian passports. Now, Moscow, despite not ruling the Soviet Union anymore, still longs to have an empire. It sees Crimea as an extension of Russia, the same language, the same people, the same culture. And on top of that, Russia has deep strategic and military interests here. Sevastopol, a port city on the Black Sea, is the home of Russia's Black Sea Fleet. Around 25,000 Russian troops are based here. Crimea is of huge strategic and cultural importance to Moscow.
Alex, any chance that in light of all of this fighting and unrest there, that Crimea could break off from Ukraine?
Well, right now it doesn't appear to be that way. There are diverging interests here. As I mentioned, many Russian Crimeans want to belong to Russia. Many want to maintain their status as an autonomous region. Some simply want to feel like they're more a part of Ukraine. So it doesn't look right now like the boundaries, the borders may be shifting, but there is certainly some discussion, there's some fear, and certainly a lot of saber rattling coming from Moscow.
And Alex, as you've been reporting, there's a third major player in this story after Russia and Ukraine. What can you tell us about the ethnic Tatar community in Crimea? Who do they stand with, and how much influence do they have right now?
Good question. The Crimean Tatars are a Muslim ethnic minority. They make up just over 10% of the population. The Crimean Russians are around 60%, and the Ukrainians are around 25%. So the Tatars are a relatively small minority, but we've seen them be very vocal. That was on full display just yesterday afternoon. We were at the Parliament building once again. Thousands of Tatars turned out here in Simferopol to support the change of the government in Kiev. They were loud, they were aggressive, they were clear in their message that they do support the revolution that we saw last week. At the same time, they do not have a huge influence in Crimea, here in Crimea, but they do help highlight that fact that we've been talking about, that there is a deep divide in Ukraine of where Ukrainians want to see this country go.
And all that unrest, Alex, before we let you go, just to bring it back home, what does that mean here for the United States, for the Europeans? And given Russia's interest in the region, is there any indication that, or willingness really, of these Western powers to intervene if the Russians were to become more actively involved there?
Well, to be perfectly frank, the unrest in Crimea could quickly expand from a local, regional Ukrainian problem to an international one. If Russia were to get involved, and you have to remember that they've mounted a massive military exercise involving tens of thousands of soldiers along Ukraine's border, as well as putting fighter jets into combat-ready positions. If they were to get involved, and that's a huge if, that it would really prompt this very urgent and important question. There does not seem to be any Western European or American desire to get engaged militarily, certainly not from the Americans. Europe and the U.S. want to solve this quietly and diplomatically. You heard that with that soundbite from John Kerry. We also heard we had the number 2 from the State Department in Kiev yesterday. They'd like to solve this with no violence. But for right now, the saber rattling is extremely strong, and it's hard to say how this is going to end.
All right, fantastic reporting. ABC's Alex Marquardt in Crimea, the south of Ukraine. Thanks so much for joining us. Follow the latest from Alex on Twitter at MarquardtA, and of course you can follow all the latest from the region here at abcnews.com. This has been an ABC News Digital Special Report. I'm Devin Dwyer in New York. Thanks for watching.